What do you feel you and your friends are most passionate about?
I'd say our lives. I mean, we're at a point in our lives that, our career is very important. I guess paving our paths is the right way to put it.
Welcome to YanaTV, where we have conversation with impactful and conscious people of Asia. My name is Yana, and today I decided to invite into the studio a representative of a younger generation. We have a lot of people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, all the way up to 80s who have been showing their life stories and sharing their wisdom with us. So today we have Kobu Chidambaram, who is 20 years old, and we're going to hear from him what is happening in the next generation field at the moment. What do you feel you and your friends are most passionate about?
I'd say our lives. I mean, we're at a point in our lives that, our career is very important. I guess paving our paths is the right way to put it.
So paving your paths, and then, the only role model you could have would be your parents or people
not
who
necessarily.
are older.
Like I said, with media, with TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, personally more YouTube.
Okay, so you're in the right place.
Well, in my opinion, yes, I'd say so. But you have so many role models on there, some for the good, I guess, some for the bad, that some of them are very controversial. And you can take a lot of inspiration. That's the beauty of the internet and media, is you have all these, parental figures on your phone.
So when you think about your career choices, let's say because you're at the age exactly, you're like 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, this is exactly timing when your generation would be thinking about what to do with their lives.
Yes.
You kind of have to leave your parental home usually, so now you're going out, so what's next? You study or you work, or what do you do?
I'm doing music because I'm very passionate about it, and I've always been very passionate about music, so it's kind of been like a no-brainer for me since day one. I mean, I've experimented with different things in my life, like technology and coding, because that's pretty hot these days, or like film. But I kind of personally just settled on music because it was like an obvious thing. I think for a lot of people, they look at the world around them. I know a lot of people are going into tech these days because it's very lucrative, and you look at yourself and you kind of line it up and see what you want with it.
When we look at what happened before us, again, our parents and our grandparents, like even in our grandparent generation, there were many cases people used to work in one job for 40, 50, 60 years. That was the entire career, right? Then the next generation, people who are now like 40s, 50s, 60s years old, there are probably maybe several opportunities that they do this. You don't spend 50 years in one career. Your generation is entirely different. You just have so much in front of you, and the jobs are being created like every day something new comes up. How do you feel about just these opportunities and all these varieties? And is it confusing? Is it empowering?
Yeah, it's a bit of both, I'd say. I think I'm kind of in the age of freelancers, if you know what I mean.
Gig economy.
We just have almost like mercenaries back in the day. We're just like, beings who can do a lot, but we don't really want to tie ourselves to one industry necessarily. So I think different skill sets are very universal for many things.
So let's say if you look at, maybe your parents or anyone else in your circle who had very different jobs, like in the very honest view, if you look from the perspective of a 20 years old, what do you think are benefits and shortcomings of how a career used to be before your generation?
I think benefit is if you truly love your job, then you're in for a nice ride because you're kind of bound to that job, right? I think the disbenefit is the complete opposite of that, is that if you get bored of your job, then you're kind of stuck with it and you have to wake up and just do that. And that's kind of like your entire life, essentially. From the moment you wake up to the moment you sleep, you're just doing that one thing. And personally, with somebody who has ADHD and a very short attention span, I think I speak for a lot of people in my generation, based off TikTok and stuff, it all promotes short attention span, right? It's very tough to repeat the same task throughout the day, you know what I mean? So it, for me personally, would be a nightmare to just do one thing all the time, which is why I love music, because it's so versatile and you can really switch it up as you like based off what you're feeling that day. So, yeah.
The guest who was just before you also in the studio, we were just sharing this example. She is probably, I think, about my age, I think also in, late 30s, early 40s.
Okay.
And we were just saying that when we were making career choice, when we were 19 or 20 years old, we still had to listen a lot to our parents, whether we liked it or not. And there were very few choices. They wanted us to be, either doctors or engineers or lawyers, right?
I think that still exists today.
But less. Right? So, I mean, these days, it is still less, again, because there are just many also more examples of, let's say, successful influencers or successful YouTubers or successful, freelancers. So parents these days just more open and willing to listen to their children.
I think kids got more stubborn these days. I think
that's probably true. Do you feel this around when you look around?
Well, personally, I feel quite stubborn. I think career is a very important thing, especially when you're a kid. When you watch a movie, you see different people do different jobs. Like you might see somebody be an investment banker or et cetera, et cetera. And you look at those people and you're like, okay, so this is what human beings do. They have to find some economic purpose in the world. And so it is very important. So I think, you don't want to listen to what other people have in store for you. You kind of want to pave your own path in that sense.
I love that. Well, and to me, it's also just fascinating to have you in the studio because all other guests who are at least 10 years older than you, maybe even more than that, saying entirely different things, how much they struggled with their career, how difficult it was for them to be strong and to be
I'm not saying it'll be easy. But
no, but the fact that I find you and also other young people who I just see around, just, first of all, I find much more clearer in what they want, and also definitely communicate much better, and definitely much more stubborn, which then brings me to the next subject. If we look at the career market now from the perspective of the company who will be hiring people of your generation, and there is a big conversation right now that it is difficult to hire, it is difficult to keep them at work because they don't want to stay. What is any advice for the employers if they want to have, people who are now out fresh of the university, work for them and actually stay in their company, don't change every 2-5 years? Like what would excite you, for example, to work for someone?
I think you have to find a good common ground. As much as employers need to stand their ground and dictate what needs to be done, because they are, after all, the employers who kind of, oversee the whole process of things. So you have to stand your ground, obviously, but also be open, because if the people that work for you don't like you because you're too stubborn, then they won't work very well, right? So it's all about a nice common ground in between.
So let's say if someone of your age would be applying, for a job right now, and you probably hear it also from your friends, like what would you be looking for?
I would definitely do like tech and coding because I do have a bit of experience in that. And at some point I was very, fixated on that. I wanted to do that, so yeah.
So if the company would wanted to hire you, what would you ask for? Like what is important besides salary?
It's not necessarily something that they could just hand over to me. It's more the environment. I would just want to work with good people. Because
how do we define good people? I mean, good values? Like
sure. People that I like. I mean, an important part of my job, another reason why I love music is because you're around people that you love so much, and I think that's a very important part of life. And I think that's something that really your job can only give you, because those are the people that you spend time with.
The other conversation, which I think is a little bit controversial, so I'm curious just to hear, your take on that. I hear a lot, at least from, again, people of my generation and older, that we have to save the planet. There's a lot of things that we need to do, that our children are not going to see flowers and animals and trees we used to see when we were growing up. And it's really important. And that's people saying who are in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. And at the same time, now when I look at teenagers or people your age who are in the very early 20s, I hear entirely different conversation often because life is much more expensive. You have to work much more harder now in many areas to just make it, just because, the cost also going, particularly in the places like Singapore or any other developed countries. So I find that for the very young generation, it's not always necessarily focus on actually helping the society, but more helping themselves first. What do you think about that?
Well, yeah, I agree. It's very polarized. I think there's a lot of people on both ends. I think on one hand, we love our home, right? We want to preserve it to the best of our abilities, and we are destroying it very fast with things like, fossil fuel and CO2, etc. But like you said, I mean, it's really tough to worry about yourself as well, and you usually have to compromise if you want to take care of the world as well. And that would mean taking, money cuts and spending more money on more sustainable causes.
Which are usually more expensive also.
Yeah, exactly.
At the moment.
Yeah, like I've seen this a bunch of grocery stores here that have a more sustainable model, but then their prices are like double essentially. But you could go to the more unsustainable source and it's a lot cheaper, but maybe they exploit labor for very cheap and stuff like that. So it's a tricky one, because on one hand you want to save money, especially if you don't have much of it, like me or other people my age, and everything appears super expensive and inflated. It becomes tough to consider sustainability, obviously, but we also want to at the same time, because if everybody comes together and attempts to be more sustainable, then the world is definitely
I think
be
your
better
generation, each generation had their own, issues. I guess your generation probably will have to deal definitely with sustainability and with the planet state one way or another. And whatever you do, that's we'll yet to see.
Yeah.
And then also AI. In general, you yourself, what do you think about just AI in terms of its effect on humanity?
I think there are many menial processes that exist today, such as processing, like package processing, for example. I think a lot of these jobs could be replaced with AI, but that would also have a very negative effect on the workforce. A lot of people would lose their jobs. But I think all in all, AI could definitely save companies a lot of money. But I mean, like knowing capitalism, that would probably just shift over to one side and it would really just benefit one party of people. The big business will win for this, and AI will be probably implemented everywhere we know, or everywhere it can be implemented in. But yeah, also I did actually read a book about AI, and it's not as scary as a lot of people think. Well, AI uses like binaries, a bunch of like millions, billions, maybe even trillions of binary inputs and outputs through like logic gates. This, I don't understand it perfectly, but it's just like a bunch of different on and off input and output, and that could never really mimic human consciousness, you know what I mean? So I don't think AI will ever take over the world or anything like that.
Okay, so then also your generation grew up with two things, and let me start with first with one. One is video games. You know, I mean, many before, I mean, even in my case, I still remember very basic video games that I had as a child. But your generation had iPads, iPhones, PlayStations, because many parents are worried it's really bad and it's going to destroy, you know, is there actually any good side to this, or there are only bad sides?
I think, yeah, parents certainly have a right to worry about that stuff. Like, I understand, I could put myself in your guys' shoes. Yeah, I mean, at the same time, I guess video games are something that accumulate a lot of your attention, and you know, we take it really seriously, or at least I personally used to, not so much anymore. I think video games can be very useful if the developers design them in a way to benefit you somehow, to educate you, for example. Like a game like Minecraft, for example. I mean, it actually teaches you about like our ecosystem and how like the environment works and how, you know, the cycle of nature works to an extent. So games like that can be very educational, you know, and there's a lot of critical thinking that goes in. Other games, not so much, but at the end of the day, they're fun, they give us happiness, so everybody deserves some happiness, right?
But what you're saying is from the, again, perspective of a parent or a developer who has more conscious mindset. So if we do develop video games, we want to make it at least educational or somewhat
and this goes to anything that accumulates a lot of attention span, like TikTok or Instagram Shorts and stuff like that.
That was actually my next question. Yeah. I wanted to ask you about social media.
Yeah, it's in the same boat as video games. It can be either very beneficial or terrible for you based off how addicted people can get to it.
You also grew up with social media, right? That's what I was saying. So first it would be video games, and the second one it would be social media, because your generation really sort of had it from the very, very beginning. Yeah. And yet, to my surprise, when I look, let's say, traditional platforms like maybe Facebook or Instagram in particular, most people there are 30 plus in terms of open accounts. Almost all younger people I know who are students these days, they all have private accounts. They don't want really anyone there except their friends. So they, you know, it's much more sort of intimate in the sense of conversations where you don't want people to actually look at your life. How perhaps, you know, parents are, that's fine, look at everything. So what do you feel about social media?
Personally, I don't like it. I've never really been too big on social media. Because I like real life a lot more. You know, like when I spent a big chunk of my childhood online, it kind of affected how I interacted with people socially.
In what way? You mean you became
it impaired my social abilities and just my ability to connect with people in real life. I do think social media is still great. I mean, you know, my mom doesn't live in the same country as I do, but I could call her like right now if I wanted to. So don't get me wrong, it's very important, but I think it's being overused today. I think people kind of live their social lives on social media and neglect their real life lives. And I think that's not good, obviously. You know, I think there's something special about the real world and just connecting with people when it's not between pixels. And I don't know.
I love that. Yeah. I love that. If I were to ask you, just like think about it about your life. And particularly, let's talk about happiness, because this also seems to be just very relevant for the younger generation. Before it was all about achievements, now it's more about fulfillment, actually. So to you, if I talk about those things like meaning, purpose, and fulfillment and happiness, so what does that mean?
Well, it's like, do you have to earn your happiness, essentially? I mean, do we live in a world where your happiness is based off of the things you've achieved? And I guess to an extent, yes, right? I mean, like as a kid, I'd want to just play video games all the time and be happy anyway. But then my dad would be like, oh, you can't be happy. I'm going to yell at you now so that you're not happy, so that you go achieve something and then you're allowed to be happy. I mean, I feel like it's a bit of both. It's important to be able to find happiness within yourself without tying it to certain achievements in life. But at the same time, I think by our nature, especially by our competitive nature, when we see other people that have achieved more than we have, that'll naturally make us less happy if we haven't achieved that as well. So
I like how you said that it's important to find happiness within ourselves. And so I'm just finishing today with the final, which I find fundamental question. How do we do that? How do we find happiness within ourselves?
I think it's already there. You just have to turn it on, just activate it. Just say, yeah, I'm going to be happy today.
I love that. Thank you so much. And that was Kobu Chidambaram on YanaTV.
Thank you.
Talking about the younger generation, people who are in their 20s right now, students entering the universities or just shortly out of the university going into the world. And we were just hearing his perspective on a variety of things. And we will include some links in the comments that you would like interesting. So please make sure you check out the description. And I'm going to be seeing you next time. So all those scary movies that we see where robots do actually invade, and take over. So
I don't believe in that.
You're saying
I don't
it's not
believe that's
happen.
possible.
Okay, it's
no,
not
I mean,
happen.
I'm not qualified to speak on this, but yeah, I don't think